Don't worry, she won't last much longer, my son's voice crackled through the phone, his tone laced with smug certainty. I froze, the mug of tea trembling in my hands. He thought he was whispering to his wife, but instead, the message had landed in my inbox. His words sliced through me, cold and cruel, and then I heard her laugh in response. Good, she said, her voice honeyed with greed. Once she's gone, everything will be ours, the house, the savings, the accounts. They thought I was already fading, a burden they could count down like an old clock waiting to stop ticking. But when they came to dinner that evening, smiling like dutiful children, I was sitting at the head of my table with something they never expected. A secret of my own. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Donnelly, and I am 76 years old. People like to say I wear my years with grace. I keep my silver hair in a neat bob, I dress in tailored cardigans and long skirts, and I carry myself with the kind of posture only decades of discipline can carve. But that morning, none of it mattered. Not the pressed blouse I had ironed the night before, not the neat rows of roses in my garden just beginning to bloom, not the medals tucked into a drawer from a teaching career that once defined me. All that mattered were the voices I had just heard, the ones I had trusted most in the world. My son, Matthew, and his wife, Caroline. I replayed the message, though every word cut deeper than the first. Matthew's voice, lower now, almost conspiratorial. Mom doesn't even know half of what we've moved around already. Once she's gone, we can finish the rest. My breath hitched. Caroline's reply was soft but certain. Don't slip now. Keep her comfortable, keep her quiet. Then it's all ours. I sat there in the quiet of my kitchen, the clock ticking far too loud, my tea cooling beside me. Betrayal does not always come like thunder. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, slipping through the smallest crack, and yet it can shake the whole foundation of your life. I had given Matthew everything. After his father died when he was 17, I worked 3 jobs just to keep him in school. I packed lunches at 4 in the morning, sewed his shirts when money ran low, and skipped meals so he could eat better. I told myself it was worth it, that one day he would see the sacrifices and repay them with love. Instead, I sat listening to my own child plot my erasure. The rest of the day moved in fragments. I trimmed the roses but couldn't smell them. I folded laundry but felt nothing in the fabric. I made soup for lunch and left it untouched on the table. My neighbors waved as they walked by, and I forced a smile, afraid that if I didn't, the truth would spill out in tears. By late afternoon, I found myself sitting in the old armchair by the bay window, the one my husband had bought me for my 40th birthday. It faced the street, and I could see children riding bicycles, dogs tugging at leashes, the ordinary rhythm of life. And yet I felt hollowed out, emptied by the realization that the people inside my home had already counted me gone. At 6 o'clock sharp, Matthew and Caroline arrived, just as they always did on Thursdays. Caroline carried a casserole, the kind she never made before marrying my son, as though she thought home-cooked meals would make her seem more sincere. Matthew kissed my cheek, his smile warm, practiced. But behind that smile, I could hear the echo of his words from the morning. She won't last much longer. I welcomed them in, though my hands itched to shake. My instinct screamed to confront them, to shove the phone in their faces and demand the truth. But there's something age gives you that youth never understands: patience. I had lived long enough to know that silence can be sharper than any blade. And so, I let them sit, let them pour wine, let Caroline prattle on about the renovations she was dreaming up for someday. She gestured to the crown molding, to the antique chandelier, to the garden visible through the window. Each comment was a dagger wrapped in silk. Such a shame to let these things just sit, she said lightly. Imagine what fresh paint and new fixtures could do. This house could really shine again. I nodded, my lips curving into what must have looked like agreement. Inside, I catalogued every word, every glance between them. They believed themselves subtle, but greed has a way of making people sloppy. Dinner passed in polite conversation, the kind we'd rehearsed 100 times before. Matthew asked about my book club. Caroline asked about my arthritis. I answered with calm civility, even laughed at a joke or two. But all the while, the voice message played in the back of my mind, a reminder that every smile they offered was counterfeit. When they finally left, I stood at the doorway, waving as though nothing had shifted. The moment the car disappeared down the street, my composure cracked. I sank into the armchair, pressing a hand to my chest. The betrayal was real, sharp, and final. But beneath the ache, another feeling stirred. Not despair. Not surrender. Something colder. Something steadier. I rose from the chair and walked to my study, the room lined with shelves of books and old file cabinets. Among the papers and keepsakes, I found the leather-bound journal where I kept notes no one else ever saw, financial records, property details, account numbers. Years ago, I began organizing them out of habit, a teacher's instinct for order. Tonight, it became something else. Armor. I placed the journal on the desk and opened my laptop. My fingers trembled only for a moment before they grew steady. I typed the name of an old colleague, someone who owed me a favor, someone who had once been a lawyer before turning to consulting. If Matthew and Caroline wanted to strip me of my dignity, they would discover I still had tools left to fight. The email was short, polite, but firm. I need to update some documents. Urgently. Please call. I hit send and sat back. The house was silent. Too silent. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, the same room where I had raised Matthew, soothed his fevers, folded his school uniforms. The irony pressed down on me. The very walls that had sheltered him were the ones he now conspired to take. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, the lines on my face deeper than I remembered, the silver of my hair more stark. But my eyes, they still held fire. I whispered to the woman staring back, "They think you're finished. Prove them wrong." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the old house, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Every sound felt sharper, every shadow more present. But fear didn't own me. Clarity did. When morning broke, I made coffee, strong and black, and sat by the window with my journal. The betrayal had landed like a stone, but stones can be foundations. And I would build something from this, something Matthew and Caroline could never erase. The phone rang just after 9. It was my old colleague, his voice steady as always. "Margaret," he said, "I got your email. Tell me everything." And so I began. I told him everything. My old colleague, Robert Sinclair, listened without interruption as I described the voice message, the look on Matthew's face at dinner, the way Caroline's eyes glittered at my chandelier as though it already belonged to her. When I finished, silence stretched across the line, heavy but not empty. Finally, Robert said, "Margaret, this isn't just betrayal. It's a plan. If they're moving things already, you need to be one step ahead." The words struck me like a bell. One step ahead. That had always been my way as a teacher, as a mother, as a woman alone in a world that wasn't built to be kind. I thanked him, my voice steady even as my hands trembled. He promised to draft some documents, to meet with me quietly, and I agreed to come by his office the next day. After the call, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the familiar tile floor. It had been Matthew's first project when he was 20, helping me replace the old linoleum after his father passed. Back then, he had knelt with determination, his hands scraped from prying up boards, his laugh echoing as we spilled grout. I had thought then that our bond was unbreakable, forged in loss and labor. Now those same hands plotted to dismantle the home we built. I couldn't dwell on that. The weight of grief would crush me if I let it. Instead, I channeled the pain into something else. I began going through my files, organizing deeds, insurance policies, letters from the bank. I discovered details I hadn't thought about in years, small accounts still in my name, bonds tucked away, even an old life insurance policy I had nearly forgotten existed. Piece by piece, I began constructing a picture. And the more I built, the stronger I felt. By evening, my plan began to take form. It wasn't loud, wasn't violent. Revenge doesn't always need fury, it can thrive in patience, in precision. I wasn't going to shout at Matthew, wasn't going to give Caroline the satisfaction of watching me unravel. No. I would let them believe I was blind. I would let them underestimate me. And when the time came, I would take everything back, quietly, cleanly, and absolutely. That Thursday night, as I washed the dinner dishes, the phone buzzed with another message. My chest tightened as I unlocked it. This time it was a video, sent by mistake again. The image was grainy, filmed in a dimly lit room, but I recognized the voices immediately. Caroline's laughter, sharp and delighted. Matthew's low tone, cautious but tinged with excitement. They were in my study. Caroline was opening drawers, rifling through my things like a thief. "She keeps everything here," she whispered. "See? Look at all these files. She'll never know what's missing. Matthew's face filled the screen briefly as he leaned down to open the bottom drawer. My son. My flesh and blood. His expression wasn't conflicted. It wasn't regretful. It was calculating. Cold. Take what we need for now, he said. We'll move the rest later. Don't make it obvious. I shut the phone, my stomach twisting. They had crossed into my sanctuary, the one place I believed safe. But instead of rage, a strange calm settled over me. Their arrogance was a gift. They had revealed themselves entirely, too blind to notice the camera on Matthew's own phone had betrayed them. I backed up the video, saving it to a hidden drive, then printed still images, Matthew's hand pulling open the drawer, Caroline clutching papers. Evidence. Proof. They wanted to erase me, but they had already signed their own confession. The next day, I met Robert at his office. He was older now, grayer, his hands lined like mine. But his mind was sharp as ever. I handed him the images and told him everything. His brow furrowed, but he didn't seem surprised. This happens more than you'd think, he said softly. Children, spouses, even siblings. Money changes people. He drafted new documents that very morning, amendments to my will, changes to my accounts, new trusts set up under conditions only I could decide. He placed them in a thick envelope and looked me straight in the eyes. Don't let them see this. Not yet. Keep them close, but not here. Somewhere safe. I walked out of his office with that envelope clutched to my chest like a shield. The autumn air was crisp, the city humming around me, but I felt as though I had stepped into another skin. The frightened mother of yesterday was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, stronger, a woman with nothing left to lose. When I returned home, I found Matthew sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee as though it belonged to him. Caroline was upstairs, her footsteps faint but unmistakable. My heart raced, but I smiled as though nothing were wrong. Mom, Matthew said casually, Caroline and I were thinking, maybe it's time you considered simplifying. You know, downsizing. The house is a lot to manage. I stirred sugar into my tea, calm and deliberate. Is it now? I asked, my voice light. He nodded, sipping again. It's just, well, you've done enough. You should be resting, enjoying yourself. We could help take some of the load. His words were smooth, but his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't offering help. He was circling, a vulture watching for weakness. I thought of the video, of Caroline's fingers prying through my files. I thought of the message where they counted me gone. And I smiled. A small, careful smile. You're right, I said softly. I should think about it. Let me consider. His shoulders eased, relief washing over his face. He thought he was winning. He thought I was softening. But inside, I was already moving pieces they couldn't see. That night, after they left, I drove to the edge of town and placed Robert's envelope in a safety deposit box at a bank Caroline didn't even know I used. I walked out lighter, my back straighter, my resolve unbreakable. The betrayal had wounded me, yes. But it had also awakened something they never expected, the part of me that refused to be erased. And as I locked the door behind me that evening, I whispered to the empty house, "You want my end? Watch me begin." The days that followed became a performance. Every word I spoke, every glance, every sigh, I crafted them carefully, shaping the version of myself Matthew and Caroline wanted to see. A weary old woman. Fragile. Confused. Easy to bend. I let my shoulders slump a little when I walked, let my sentences trail off as though my memory faltered. Their eyes lit up when I did it. They thought they were winning. Caroline, especially, began to circle more boldly. One afternoon, as she folded napkins at my dining table, she smiled with saccharine sweetness. "Margaret, have you ever thought about traveling? You know, taking time for yourself? Imagine. Paris in the spring, Rome in the fall." She touched the lace edge of the tablecloth as if testing its texture. "We could take care of everything here while you're away." I stirred sugar into my tea and pretended not to notice her eyes dart toward the mahogany cabinet where I kept some of my older files. "Paris," I murmured, feigning distraction. "That does sound nice." Her lips curved. She thought the bait was taken. But she had no idea that while she toyed with fantasies of my absence, I was already setting traps she would never see coming. The first step was gathering allies. I reached out to Helen, a neighbor 2 houses down, a widow my age with sharp instincts and a sharper tongue. She had seen enough in her own life to recognize betrayal when it crossed her path. Over tea, I told her just enough of the truth, enough that if anything happened, she would know who to point the finger at. Her eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening on her teacup. Matthew always did seem ambitious, she said softly. Don't you worry, Margaret. I'll keep watch. I also began visiting the local bank more often, shifting small sums, moving accounts. The tellers, young women with polite smiles, didn't ask questions. They didn't need to know why I suddenly preferred cash to credit, or why I asked about safe deposit boxes. All they saw was another grandmother preparing for travel. Meanwhile, Matthew and Caroline grew bolder. One evening, they came for dinner again, arriving early and offering to help in the kitchen. I watched them exchange glances as I chopped vegetables, their whispers carrying just beyond earshot. I caught fragments, signatures, timing. She won't notice. I smiled to myself, lowering my head as if the knife required all my concentration. They thought my silence meant ignorance. Halfway through the meal, Matthew cleared his throat. Mom, Caroline and I were talking, about the future. Maybe it's time we help you with some of the financial stuff. Just to make things easier for you. Caroline leaned forward, her smile wide, eyes gleaming. Yes, we'd love to. You shouldn't have to worry about bills and accounts at your age. You deserve peace. I placed my fork down gently, folded my napkin, and let out a small laugh. You're so thoughtful, I said. Perhaps I should think about that. Matthew's eyes flickered with triumph. Caroline reached for my hand, squeezing it with false warmth. But they didn't notice the way my gaze lingered on the corner of the room, where a small recording device sat hidden in a vase, capturing every word. The following morning, I played back the recording, listening to their syrupy voices twist into demands cloaked as concern. It was perfect. Evidence layered atop evidence. Still, evidence wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed them to act, to reveal their hand fully. So I dangled temptation. One Saturday, I invited them over and casually mentioned that I was considering putting things in order. I let my voice tremble, as though the weight of mortality pressed heavily on me. I don't want to leave a mess behind. Perhaps it's time I update some papers. Matthew's eyes gleamed, though he quickly masked it with concern. Caroline's smile widened like a predator catching scent of prey. Of course, Margaret, she said sweetly. We can help you with all of that. It's no trouble at all. I nodded, letting the silence stretch. Maybe next week, I murmured. We'll see. They left that night nearly humming with excitement, convinced the door had opened. But behind their backs, I called Robert again. He chuckled when I told him what I'd done. You're feeding them rope, Margaret, he said. Soon enough, they'll hang themselves with it. The plan began to sharpen. I decided to host a small family gathering, a Sunday dinner with my sister Evelyn, my nephew Daniel, and of course Matthew and Caroline. It would be the perfect stage. Evelyn was sharp, Daniel observant, and both of them loyal to me. I wanted witnesses. When the evening arrived, I dressed with deliberate care, a soft lavender dress, pearls at my throat, silver hair brushed smooth. I looked every inch the aging matriarch, gracious and serene. But inside, I burned with purpose. Dinner unfolded with laughter and stories, Evelyn recounting old family holidays, Daniel talking about his new job. Matthew and Caroline played their parts well, attentive, helpful, their smiles radiant. But I could feel their impatience beneath it all, the way Caroline's eyes kept flicking toward me, the way Matthew leaned forward as if waiting for an opening. Finally, after dessert, I leaned back in my chair, feigning a tired sigh. I've been thinking a lot lately, I said softly. About the future. About how to make things easier when I'm no longer here. The table fell quiet. Evelyn's fork stilled. Daniel glanced at me with worry. Matthew's expression tightened, then softened into practiced concern. Caroline's hand fluttered to her chest. Oh, Margaret, she said. That's so thoughtful of you. I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. I don't want to leave a mess behind. Maybe it's time I consider some changes. Updating documents, moving things around, making sure everything is clear. Matthew leaned forward, his voice gentle but eager. Mom, we'd be honored to help with that. You shouldn't have to worry about all those details. Let us handle it. I smiled faintly, my eyes lowering. Perhaps. We'll talk more soon. The moment passed, conversation shifting, laughter resuming. But I caught the quick look Matthew shot Caroline, the flicker of triumph in her eyes. They believed it was done. Later, after everyone left, I gathered the plates with Daniel's help. He glanced at me, his voice low. Aunt Margaret, are you sure about them? I looked at him, at his earnest young face, and smiled a small weary smile. Don't worry, Daniel, I whispered. I'm more sure than ever. What I didn't tell him was that the trap was nearly set. One final push, one final performance, and Matthew and Caroline would show their true selves in front of everyone. And when they did, I would be ready, waiting with the kind of revenge they would never see coming. The days leading up to the final act were some of the hardest of my life. I had to live with their laughter echoing in my head, their smug whispers replaying every time I closed my eyes. But I also knew that patience was my weapon. If I revealed myself too soon, if I let my anger spill out, they would retreat and hide their tracks. So I played the role of the gentle old mother, the one who was too weary to fight. I began dropping hints, each one carefully measured. At breakfast with Matthew, I sighed and said, I really should make sure the bank has all the right signatures before something happens to me. Caroline, who had joined us late, almost dropped her coffee cup in excitement. Absolutely, Margaret, she said quickly. We can go with you. Make sure it's all in order. I waved her off with a tired hand. Not today. Soon. The look they exchanged was pure hunger. That same afternoon, I called Robert again. It's time, I told him. He didn't need details. He knew what I meant. We met at his office the next morning, and he finalized the documents I had already arranged. My assets were now protected in ways Matthew and Caroline could never touch. Every account was locked with conditions. Every property was secured under a trust. If anything happened to me, the beneficiaries would not be my son or his wife but charities, scholarships, and my loyal nephew Daniel. Robert looked at me with quiet admiration as I signed. You've outplayed them, Margaret. They'll never see this coming. I nodded, sliding the pen across the paper with steady hands. They wanted to erase me. Now they'll erase themselves. When I returned home, I found Caroline waiting in the living room, her legs crossed, a smile painted across her lips. Margaret, she said smoothly, I was thinking, maybe it's time we sit down together and go over your will. It's important to be organized. I smiled back, lowering myself into the armchair. You're right. I've been thinking about that too. Maybe we can talk about it Sunday, after church. I'll invite a few people. We'll make it official. Her smile widened. She thought she had one. That Sunday, I dressed carefully, pulling on a cream-colored suit with pearl buttons, a brooch at my collar. My hair was set neatly, my hands steady. When Matthew and Caroline arrived, they were glowing with anticipation. Caroline wore a red dress, expensive and far too bold for church, while Matthew carried a leather briefcase I didn't recognize. Inside, my small living room filled with family, Evelyn, Daniel, and Helen from next door, who had baked a pie as though this were any ordinary gathering. Robert had also agreed to come, under the guise of an old friend. He sat quietly in the corner, his eyes watchful. After lunch, I cleared my throat and spoke softly. I've been thinking a lot about the future. I don't want to leave behind confusion or burdens. It's time we make things clear. Matthew jumped in immediately, his voice warm, rehearsed. Mom, that's wonderful. We can help you with that today, if you like. I even brought some forms. He gestured toward the briefcase. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes bright. Yes, Margaret, it's so important. We just want to make sure everything is safe and simple. I folded my hands in my lap, tilting my head as though considering. Safe and simple, I repeated. Yes. That sounds good. Why don't you show everyone what you've prepared? Matthew glanced at Caroline, then pulled papers from the briefcase, spreading them across the table. Legal documents, neatly printed, but not the ones Robert had drafted. These were their own creation, designed to hand everything over with my consent. Just some standard forms, Matthew said smoothly. We can fill in the details. Mom, all you'd need to do is sign here, and it'll take care of the house, the accounts, everything. You won't have to worry. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Daniel shifted in his chair. Helen leaned forward slightly, her lips pressed thin. Robert, silent in the corner, crossed one leg over the other and waited. I picked up the pen Matthew slid across the table. My hand trembled deliberately, the way an old woman's hand might. Caroline reached out as if to guide me, her voice syrupy sweet. Here, let me help you, Margaret. It's just a simple signature. I paused, the pen hovering. Then I looked up, my eyes sharp, my voice suddenly steady. And what happens after I sign, Caroline? Do I disappear quietly? Do you and Matthew finally get what you whispered about when you thought I couldn't hear? The room froze. Caroline's smile faltered. Matthew's eyes widened. Evelyn gasped softly. I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a small device, clicking it on. Matthew's voice filled the room. Don't worry, she won't last much longer. Caroline's laughter followed. Once she's gone, everything will be ours, the house, the savings, the accounts. Silence thundered through the room when the recording ended. Caroline's face drained of color. Matthew stammered, Mom, there's a mistake. But I wasn't finished. I slid a printed still image across the table, Matthew rifling through my drawers, Caroline clutching papers. Proof. Evidence. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's jaw tightened. Helen shook her head with fury. I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm, almost gentle. You thought I was blind. You thought I was weak. But I've lived too long, given too much, to be erased by my own child. Caroline's hand trembled as she reached for Matthew. This isn't, she set us up. Robert finally stood, his voice firm. What she did was protect herself. And what you've done, he gestured to the documents on the table, is attempted fraud. In front of witnesses. Matthew's face crumpled, his mask of charm shattered. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Mom, I didn't mean. But I shook my head. No, Matthew. You meant every word. And now, so does everyone else. The room was heavy with silence. I gathered the papers from the table and slid them into Robert's hands. Take these, I said. We'll need them later. Caroline's voice rose, desperate now. You can't do this. You can't cut us out. I stood, tall and unyielding. Watch me. They had come expecting my surrender. Instead, they left in disgrace, their greedy hands empty, their schemes laid bare before the people they could never manipulate. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Exposure was only the beginning. The true revenge was still to come, the kind that wouldn't just reveal their betrayal but destroy every advantage they thought they had. The silence that followed Matthew and Caroline's hasty exit clung to the air like smoke. Evelyn pressed my hand, her eyes shimmering with both sorrow and pride. Daniel shook his head in disbelief, muttering, I never thought he'd go that far. Robert gathered the fraudulent papers into his briefcase, his voice calm but firm. This is more than family drama, Margaret. This is a crime. What happens next is up to you. I didn't answer right away. My heart was heavy, yes, but it wasn't weak. My son's betrayal had cut deeper than any wound, but I wasn't about to let it fester. Betrayal is not only about pain, it's about clarity. I finally saw them for what they were, and now it was time for them to see me as I truly was, not a burden, not a fading shadow, but a force they could never erase. The next morning, I called the bank. With Robert's guidance, I froze access to every account that bore even a whisper of my name. I shifted funds into the trust one had already prepared, binding every dollar to conditions Matthew and Caroline could never fulfill. Scholarships, charities, and Daniel as executor, every cent accounted for. By the time Matthew tried to check in that afternoon, everything was sealed. When the teller denied his attempts, he must have felt the first crack in his carefully built illusion. Caroline, no doubt, urged him on with her venomous whispers. But when they tried again the following day, the doors closed tighter. The safety deposit boxes were locked. The house deeds were untouchable. Their hands clawed at walls that would never yield. And then came the final blow. With Robert's help, I contacted the authorities. Not with vengeance in my voice, but with truth. I handed them the recordings, the images, the forged documents Matthew had tried to slip under my pen. Fraud. Conspiracy. Attempted theft. I didn't want to see my son in handcuffs, not truly. But I wanted the law to hold a mirror up to his choices. The investigation moved quickly. Perhaps too quickly for Matthew and Caroline to grasp what was happening. One afternoon, as I sat in my garden, clipping the roses, a patrol car pulled up to their driveway across town. The neighbors watched as Matthew and Caroline were led out, their polished smiles gone, their masks shattered. I didn't gloat. I didn't cheer. I simply clipped another rose and whispered, "Thorns at last." News traveled fast in our small town. People whispered at the grocery store, shook their heads in church. My son, the charming man everyone thought so reliable, was now the subject of hushed conversations. Caroline, who once strutted through social gatherings as though she were queen, avoided every eye. The humiliation spread like wildfire, and there was no hiding from it. But humiliation wasn't enough. My revenge wasn't complete until I secured my peace. So, I called Daniel one evening and invited him over. He arrived with a hesitant smile, carrying a basket of bread he'd baked himself. "You didn't have to," I said softly, placing the warm loaf on the counter. "I wanted to," he replied. "You've done so much for me, Aunt Margaret. I don't know how to thank you." I handed him an envelope, the executor documents Robert had finalized. "You thank me by protecting this," I said. "This house, these accounts, this legacy, it's all tied to causes I care about, with you to make sure it's done right. You'll be the guardian now, Daniel. Not Matthew. Not Caroline." He swallowed hard, his eyes bright with emotion. "I won't let you down." I smiled, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "I know you won't." The next Sunday, I walked into church with Evelyn on one arm and Helen on the other. Whispers followed me, not of pity, but of respect. People nodded, some even smiled with encouragement. They knew I had faced betrayal, but I hadn't crumbled. I had stood, fought, and reclaimed my dignity. And as I sat in the pew, the sunlight streaming through stained glass across my lap, I thought of Matthew. My son. My boy, once so full of promise, now consumed by greed. I thought of Caroline, her ambition turned to poison. They had tried to write my ending, to close my story before it was ready. But I had written it myself. My revenge wasn't about rage. It wasn't about shouting or striking. It was about outlasting them, outwitting them, and leaving them with nothing but the ruin of their own choices. When I returned home that afternoon, I sat in my armchair, my roses blooming in the garden beyond the window. The house was quiet, peaceful. Mine. And I whispered into the stillness, not with bitterness, but with certainty, they thought I was gone. But I'm still here. And I'm stronger than ever. The betrayal had cut me, yes. But the revenge, the justice, had healed me in ways they would never understand. Because while Matthew and Caroline's legacy would forever be shame, mine would be roses, scholarships, charity, and the strength of a woman who refused to be erased.